welcome to the RCR Wireless News webinar looking at Voice over LTE. My name is Dan Meyer. I'm Editor-in-Chief of RCR Wireless News. Today we'll be discussing trends in the VoLTE space. Joining me today on this discussion will be Miguel Myhrer from Accenture, Roger Entner from Recon Analytics, and Payam Maveddat from Taqua to provide an overview of the current VoLTE market from several different angles. You can see here the different panel members today and also some contact information and titles for the people involved. So, all right. So, as I said, my name is Dan Meyer. I'm Editor-in-Chief of RCR Wireless News. Here is a quick background on RCR for those not familiar with us, highlighting that we've been covering the wireless space here for nearly 30 years, or just slightly before there was an actual commercial cellular industry. So been around the space for quite a while. As previously mentioned, we will also be joined by Miguel Myhrer, who is the Managing Director for North America Wireless Network and Product Development Practice at Accenture. And here's some background on Accenture for those in need of such information. Miguel, thanks for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Also joining us is Roger Entner, who is a longtime industry analyst and founder of Recon Analytics. Here's some background on Roger and on Recon. Roger, thanks for taking the time today. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
All right. And finally, last but not least, we have also joining us today is Payam Maveddat, who is the Executive Vice President of Product Management at Taqua. Here's some background on Taqua, and also and Payam, thanks for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Great. All right, so we'll get started here. So all three of those panel members who we have here, as well as myself, will be part of the Q&A session that we have planned for the final 20 minutes or so of this 1-hour webinar. For those with questions for our panel members, please feel free to send those in using the questions tab there on the GoToWebinar control panel. If you have a question for a specific member of the panel, please make sure to include their name in the question as well. Here's a quick rundown of the agenda for today's webinar, where we hope to provide a comprehensive overview of where the wireless industry is in relation to VoLTE, or at least as comprehensive as possible with our time-limited format here. We'll probably not be getting too technical, but I think we'll at least provide some great insight into the market. Also, as a reminder for those who might be having some audio difficulties here, we will try to speak as loudly as possible on this webinar, but please make sure to check your audio settings on your computer as well. All right, so we're going to start by giving a quick overview on the space, tapping into some of the findings from a new report we are releasing today that is available from our website. The report was put together by my colleague, Ali Winter, and like I said, can be accessed from our website at rcrwireless.com. So I want to start by just, I guess, putting some numbers out there for the VoLTE space and where some analysts predict the market is heading. As you can see, forecasts call for strong growth in the uptake of VoLTE service over the next 4 to 5 years, with 12 commercial VoLTE networks expected to be live by the end of this year, serving approximately 8 million customers. A good portion of those customers will be in South Korea, where SK Telecom has been aggressively rolling out VoLTE services. The carrier was one of the first to launch commercial VoLTE services last August, and at that time they were joined by a domestic carrier, Metro PCS, which also launched VoLTE in select markets across some of the United States, but of course has since been acquired by T-Mobile US, which has put sort of a damper on that offering, but it's still somewhat out there, I guess you could say. Verizon Wireless domestically here is expected to be the first nationwide operator to roll out a broad deployment of VoLTE services, with the carrier noting that the launch was on track to begin at some point next year. The carrier has said it plans to launch services across a very broad footprint, which should be helped by its plans to have virtually its entire 2G and 3G footprint covered with LTE services by the end of this year. As we will see, this coverage requirement is pretty important for carriers and customers to take advantage of VoLTE. We found in this report that there were also a number of carriers that are not yet ready to throw their weight behind VoLTE, citing concerns with the maturity of the technology. However, it should also be noted that some of these operators are also still in the midst of rolling out LTE services and could be hard-pressed to match their legacy voice coverage with the LTE services needed to support VoLTE. So that could hinder some of those decisions as well. So why is industry moving towards VoLTE? According to a number of the people that we spoke with for our report, carriers are looking to glean as much spectrum efficiency as possible from their networks, and by moving voice traffic to their all IP-based LTE networks, it's one way for them to get as much capacity into their networks as possible. The move will also allow carriers to eventually turn down their legacy network. That will then allow them to free up spectrum resources to further support the data requirements of LTE customers. As we have seen from some operators, running separate networks is a money and resource-consuming enterprise, and the fewer of these a carrier needs to deal with, the more efficient they can operate. In addition to the spectrum and operating efficiencies, VoLTE can tap into the data capabilities of LTE, allowing carriers to offer value-added services to voice customers. This has been seen somewhat to this point through rich communication services that have the potential to allow carriers to upsell features for services that has to this point been commoditized by the wireless industry over the past several years. Carriers will also be able to better combat over-the-top players that have taken advantage of the app economy to offer voice and video services to consumers running atop the data networks supplied by carriers. Of course, with all these possibilities will come challenges. Many of these topics will also be covered by my colleagues here, but here's a quick synopsis of some of the hurdles that could trip up VoLTE rollouts. Obviously, voice quality remains a bit of a concern for VoLTE deployments. Anyone that has used a VoIP service can attest to the sporadic voice quality that is provided. Something that will be harder to get past cellular customers that have become accustomed to a certain level of quality, even though that quality itself is at times subject to variations. On this topic, Verizon Wireless did note last year when I spoke to them at a trade show that they were holding off on VoLTE at that point because of voice quality concerns. Though more recently they have said that they become more satisfied with what they're seeing in the field when it comes to voice quality. Another issue will be how carriers treat voice calls that have to fall back to legacy networks should a customer move outside of VoLTE coverage. This will, of course, be a bigger issue for carriers that will be challenged to meet LTE parity with legacy services. Another issue could come from the increase in traffic across LTE networks caused by the inclusion of voice traffic. Some carriers in some markets are already at times finding data traffic impacting LTE network quality, so adding voice traffic to this, while still probably not a large segment of the traffic, could have an impact on LTE capacity. And of course, there is a need to get devices that support VoLTE into the hands of consumers. A true VoLTE call is only possible if parties on both ends have a VoLTE-enabled device, and if both parties are in a VoLTE coverage area, I should say. Again, this is a topic I'm sure will be covered by our panel members here, but one that could take several years to finally get into the marketplace. All right, so with that quick overview from our report, I wanted to hand it over to Miguel Myhrer from Accenture to provide a look at the firm's view of the VoLTE market. Also like to remind those of you listening in that if you have any questions for myself or for Miguel or for any of our panel members, to please send those in using the questions tab there on the GoToWebinar control panel, as we'll use the final 20 minutes or so of this webinar to answer some of those questions. So with that, Miguel, over to you.
Thank you, Dan.
No problem.
Hello, everyone. My name is Miguel Myhrer. I'm a managing director here at Accenture in our communications practice. So I'm going to take just a few minutes to talk about voice over LTE. But before we jump into that, one is certainly a topic of conversation with many carriers. before we get into the specifics, especially around the migration, which I'll spend a bit more time on, is a few macro-level items. One is LTE has been employed in many carriers globally today, more than 30 carriers globally. And that also affects the voice over LTE until those all those commercial deployments are more settled and baked in. In the U.S., that's obviously not as much of an issue given the forefront the U.S. has been doing in LTE. But one piece is the deployment of LTE globally. That's one component. The next one is on the voice over LTE, there's been a lot of discussions around and press releases around the technology constraints and the impediments from a technology perspective on voice over LTE. But it is as much a business decision as it is a technology decision on when to deploy voice over LTE. Both a business modeling discussion and also a discussion with the marketing and sales groups to find out where and when it makes sense, financial sense, to deploy voice over LTE, which I'll discuss a bit more in the migration path discussion shortly. The third piece actually is currently the solutions are working well. Today, the sugar switch fallback for the carriers works well. The over-the-top players are expanding and they're doing well as well. So there are solutions in the market today that provide this capability. So there are alternative solutions that work well. And finally, today, that's affecting voice over LTE as well is the significant portion of revenues today from the carriers come from voice and SMS. Given the amount of revenue, there is some revenue protection that's going on today as well, deciding when to deploy voice over LTE to ensure you don't cannibalize the existing revenue streams. So with those four major points, the LTE penetration globally and also in the U.S. is certainly more significant. It's not just a business decision; it's also technology, a combination of technology and business. Then you have alternative channels today, and finally the amount of revenue that will be affected over time by an introduction of voice over LTE. So with those four major components, I wanted to kind of go into the next slide, which is when does it make sense, or what are the more nuances around migration to voice over LTE? So certainly all the mobile operators are talking about it. Many of them are actually have teams focused on it, especially here in the U.S. There's some very large teams on the engineering side focused on that, and we're working with some of them. But working with them, what are the key constraints on when they're looking to deploy it? It's primarily based, as Dan mentioned, spectrum. What is the urgency of spectrum in certain markets, for instance, in the U.S. or globally, to introduce voice over LTE to free up spectrum? Second is how much coverage you currently have around LTE. Have you fully embedded coverage, not just nationwide, but have you embedded coverage within the local markets? Is there enough LTE coverage in local markets to make financial sense to deploy voice over LTE? And the other one is the legacy network itself. The legacy network itself, how many changes you need to make on the wireline infrastructure? And second being the radio infrastructure as well. What are the changes you need to make to ensure the right quality of service for voice over LTE? An important component, frankly, also in the migration is coupling not just the device and the battery life that you would need to worry about, but also the user experience. So an area that some carriers are spending more time on than others around the voice over LTE is when you launch it, what will be the user experience behind it? There's a window of opportunity for the carriers to ensure the user experience that a voice over LTE provides is coupled with you can have a meeting place right away. You can join a conference call quickly. How can you enable the features and functionalities to make it easy to use by the for instance, it's an app. So how would you couple both the technology piece, the business decisions, and the modeling behind that, and the user experience? And lastly is how much do you want to sweat your existing assets? Of course, the carriers have invested a significant amount of money in 3G, and in Europe, that's even more the case. So how much do you want to sweat those assets to then move to voice over LTE? And that's a business decision that needs to be made with the spectrum and with the implementation challenges that come with voice over LTE. So the actual maximizing your existing infrastructure and investments is really important. And then also maximizing your revenue streams behind that. So the user experience coupled with maximizing your existing capabilities is really important in the previous slide that Dan was showing. But it's so the migration piece it's a complex piece. It includes, of course, your legacy network, your spectrum, so how much you want to sweat your existing assets. So it's not just a technology issue that you'll see more in the press about battery life and about the voice quality. It certainly is things that need to be concerned with. That's my major point around the migration piece. Of course, the last slide is around some of the challenges and advantages on that, which may take away a little bit on my story around the migration pieces. Of course, good call quality is important. Low cost to serve is a very big advantage of our voice over LTE. But there are some challenges that need to be taken care of, especially on the technology front, that are being handled, but are being investigated by the engineers, both on the equipment side, but also on the operator side. And Dan, that's my short talk here.
Very good. Appreciate it. Well, Miguel, thanks so much for that. As I mentioned, if you have any questions for Miguel or for any of our panel members here, please send those along using the questions tab there on the GoToWebinar control panel, as we'll use the final 20 minutes or so to answer some of those questions. So again, Miguel, thanks so much for the insight there. And like you said, obviously a lot of challenges, a lot of issues involved with VoLTE. It's one of those things that the market is moving that way. It's just a matter of time and when and how they do it. So good insight there. We definitely appreciate that. All right. Well, let's move on. Now we'll I'd like to bring on Roger Entner from Recon Analytics to provide some additional insight into the VoLTE market here. Roger, thanks for joining us today. We appreciate that. I guess maybe I'll start with getting your overall view of the VoLTE space. I guess your views on the need for VoLTE and maybe some of the challenges that you see that could trip up deployments of VoLTE.
Well, the need for VoLTE is clearly driven, as Miguel said beforehand, by the spectrum crunch that we're expecting or that we're facing here in the United States, and the need to simplify the networks. VoLTE allows a substantially higher spectrum efficiency than what we have seen since 2G voice. One of the things that people don't realize is that when we went from 2G to 3G voice, spectral efficiency actually went down due to the way it's implemented, and VoLTE is the way to regain that efficiency and some more. Also, I think what will happen is that we will, unleash when everything becomes then one network, it will be much easier to run and organize, because right now we have to run a packet switch data network and a voice and a circuit switched voice network, and with VoLTE, you can simplify that, and some of the carriers are going to shut down 2G voice in about 2 to 3 years, and that will help to simplify it, as we can't really expect, even though we the H block is coming, all 10 megahertz of it. Maybe or maybe not, the incentive auction will happen, but overall, we need the 500 megahertz that the federal government has promised us, and it's like waiting for Godot. And as we all know, Godot never showed up. So I hope that the 500 megahertz will show up, but in the meantime, we have to make do with this. But I think one of the significant things that VoLTE will become, as voice becomes a data application, is it opens up to integrate voice in a greater way in applications than ever before, as it is basically just moving bits and pieces. And the same way, smartphones and 3G data have unleashed the application revolution and creative juices got flowing here. I think we will see another wave of innovation coming where voice becomes much more seamlessly integrated into applications than ever before. So I think that's a very critical component. In terms of implementation, it's what's very interesting is that the handsets for VoLTE have been ready for years, but the network latencies is what has really and the network traffic is really what has held us behind, and we're getting there, especially with release 10 of LTE release 10, and you see how all these launches are really, the Metro PCS launch was dabbling around with some technology as it was clearly not ready yet. So congratulations for being first, but not really. And then we have the differentiation between LTE on GSM networks, the 3GPP, and on CDMA networks, the legacy part and the core part, which is 3GPP2. And for example, if you are a legacy CDMA provider, you have to wait until your entire footprint is LTE before you can do VoLTE. And so that's one of the key reasons that holds Verizon back. Now, the big advantage of Verizon is it's a year, if not more, ahead of the competition in terms of network coverage and system coverage. So Verizon will be probably the first. Verizon will definitely be the first one with a nationwide implementation. As a 3GPP carrier like AT&T or T-Mobile, you can implement VoLTE on a market-by-market basis, and it will play well with circuit-switched voice. So we might see either T-Mobile or AT&T, try to steal the crown of, I'm the first one with more than five markets. But it also, if we look at the other CDMA provider, it will be a while until Sprint will have VoLTE. So we will see a clear differentiation again, and we will see that heavy investment in networks will actually pay off and will provide users with tangible benefits. And so it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out.
Yeah. Well, and that's been a good point too. I know at the recent CCA show that I attended, there was a lot of concern about VoLTE from small rural carriers because again they're kind of dependent upon the large guys for roaming coverage. And if they were to roll out VoLTE, they were kind of dependent on the larger carriers having VoLTE as well. So it does seem like for carriers that perhaps don't have a broad footprint as a Verizon is looking to have, the challenge for them could be a lot more severe, or definitely a different kind of decision-making process than a carrier that kind of controls its own footprint for the most part.
Oh, absolutely. It's one of the things that this highlights is that while it becomes simpler and simpler for the consumer to have these really advanced technologies in their hands, on the back end, this is getting exponentially more complex, and the amount of moving parts that need to be coordinated is astonishing. It's we have magic in our hands, and in the background, the little worker bees are working feverishly to make it look seamless.
Yeah. Indeed. Well, hey, Roger, definitely appreciate the insight on that there. I want to also bring on our final panel member before we get to the question and answer session there. So I know we've got a lot of questions coming in on this topic. So, and again, for those questions that you guys do have, please feel free to use the questions tab there on the GoToWebinar control panel to send those in, and we'll get to those at the end of the webinar here. But with that, I want to bring on Payam Maveddat, who's from Taqua, to provide some perspective on the VoLTE space from a vendor point of view. So Payam, thanks so much for joining us today. We appreciate it.
So thank you very much. Just want to give you a status from an equipment vendor perspective and our engagement with the carriers in this space. As it was mentioned earlier, majority of the carriers are in various phases and stages of the implementation of LTE for data, and because they're getting single radio handsets, they're forced into doing some kind of a circuit switch fallback model where they take advantage of the LTE for data and the circuit switch network for their voice and primarily voice applications. So many of the European operators have implemented that in their MSCs, and in North America, in the CDMS space, we also see the implementation for enhanced CS fallback being done, and sometimes in first half of next year you will start seeing launch of circuit switch fallback in the U.S. market in the CDMA among the CDMA carriers. From a standpoint of VoLTE, as was stated by my colleagues on the phone, so you have pretty much two types of the carriers that are out there. You have the haves, what I call, which have the ability to build a nationwide network, as was mentioned, like Verizon. So in that case, their rollout and implementation would be somewhat easier because they don't have to worry about service parity with the legacy infrastructure. Then you have the other carriers that was also mentioned that have islands of LTE coverage, and the islands are gradually growing, but not at the pace that they need. So in that case, they have different set of challenges that they have to overcome in order to be able to even contemplate launch of LTE service. So if we go to the next slide, so the challenges that we see today, there are a lot of trials that are going on for VoLTE, but as was mentioned, having a handset vendor to come with an integrated client, and what we hear from the handset vendors, they're looking to put the VoIP client inside the baseband unit and make that a fully integrated part of their solution. That becomes very, very critical. Otherwise, the handset cost will become an issue, and also integration with the network becomes a significant issue. And also, there is you have carriers like Verizon that have the buying power, but among the smaller carriers, they're not able to drive the handset roadmap hard enough in order to have access to the devices. The other issue that we see is the inability to provide a service continuity and being able for the network to determine which domain the user resides in order to offer the service. So single radio voice call continuity becomes a key requirement, and again, having that requires the handsets that support that capability. And then the GSM implementation or in the 3GPP implementation is very different than the 3GPP2 implementation. So the challenges remain difficult. And one other capability that remains to be a significant challenge is the seamless handoff between LTE and cellular in that direction only. And at least to my knowledge, none of the handset vendors have committed to bring in a handset in order to provide seamless handoff. And to my knowledge, being in this industry for 20 years, handover was always the most difficult part and required a lot of optimization, both from a device, from the radio, and from core. And I think that will become a challenge later on as VoLTE without seamless handoff starts taking off. We talked about the LTE coverage, and one of the big issues that still remain is the performance of LTE for data services on cell edge. On the cell edge, the data service is not an issue because the throughput may be getting impacted slightly, so you may not receive your audio streaming or video streaming at the same level. However, the issue remains that voice, because of its real-time requirement and tight quality requirements at the cell edge, will be degraded, and the performance will be horrendous. And that's one of the fairly significant issues that we witnessed in several of the carriers that we had engagement. One other issue that cannot overlook, especially for carriers that don't have ubiquitous LTE coverage, is the concept of service parity. How am I going to make sure that all my services that I have in my cellular network are applied on the LTE? There are a lot of intelligent network applications out there, a lot of prepaid system, a lot of ring backbone system, and there are a lot of subscriber provisioning systems that are tied to the cellular network. And when you move to LTE, all of these network elements may have to be migrated. So how are you going to be able to offer service parity across the domain so that when, for instance, you have your star code features activated in one domain, it's presented on the other domain at the same time, and synchronizing what's in the subscriber database in the LTE domain versus subscriber database in the cellular domain. So they become very, very critical. One other aspect that cannot be overlooked, and this is hampering a lot of the VoLTE rollout, even in North America, has to do with regulatory services, specifically location-based services that map into Enhanced 911. There are 5,400 PSAPs in the U.S. that are all legacy-based, and they need to be upgraded to a next-gen in order to support the 911 service. And unless and until that is resolved, I don't think any carrier will be wise to deploy voice over LTE. When Metro PCS that was mentioned, when they launched their service, their handset actually worked in a unique way. When 911 was made, this handset automatically switched to cellular, so it still took advantage of the enhanced 911 services that existed in the cellular domain. So until and unless these are overcome, I think the launch and rollout of LTE would be somewhat slow. With that in mind, I'll hand that back to the chairperson.
Sounds good. That sounds good. Well, yeah, obviously, and like you said, Payam, there, that regulatory issue is one of those things that, yeah, like you said, can't be overlooked. I mean, obviously, there are issues that each government has for their cellular operators, and the move to data could usually is moving faster than what the regulators are able to keep up with. So that'll be one of those gating factors as well going forward. So good information there. We definitely appreciate that. So. Well, with that, I know we've got quite a few questions that have come in, so I think I want to get to the Q&A part here. Like I said, if you do have some questions for our panel members, please feel free to send those in using the questions tab there on the GoToWebinar control panel. We'll get to as many of those as we can here. We will also be sharing these questions with our panel members, so if they have some time offline, they can follow up as well. So we'll get some of those now. But it looks like we got one in here for Miguel. Someone asking, I guess, perhaps what changes in operations and business models do you see carriers implementing around the world? I'm guessing that's related to VoLTE rollout. So, Miguel, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I saw that question as well. Well, frankly, it's a big topic. I narrow down the topic into a little for specific voice. Certainly a very large topic. The video space is the one area that actually is causing headaches for the CTOs today globally. What do you do with the increase in video traffic and user-generated content traffic and on the networks? So the business model is how do you tackle that influx of data going through the networks is an ongoing discussion with the content providers. So do you provide a special access or tax? You put a, for example, with AT&T mentioned at GSM World Congress a couple of years back, you do a toll. You do a toll for everybody using the data. And when you have 1-800 number today, you have a toll charge for that data. So there's actually discussions with different content providers, both in the U.S. the model is slightly different than Europe. So how do you handle who pays for all that traffic is still an ongoing discussion and not fully decided yet, or not fully decided on how you approach that. So it's a very good question and not an easy answer on the part of the business models. But frankly, it's the biggest area is how do you deal with video in a sense. On the voice over LTE, that has maybe less impact initially on some of the networks, or what the impact right now is, frankly, is video versus the voice. But all the voice over LTE is being investigated to being talked through. How do you reduce or throttle down the video traffic is something that's more worrisome today.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, we got quite a few questions here looking at kind of, I guess, asking about the quality of service issues with VoLTE. I know I mentioned that in my opening. I think the other panelists did as well. Maybe for Roger, I guess what challenges, how do you see the industry tackling that QoS issue? Because it does seem like with voice, people do expect voice to work a certain way. I mean, we've become accustomed to very little delay in voice traffic, and obviously people aren't using voice as much as they used to, but they're still, when it's used, people expect it to work a certain way. How do you see the industry, I guess, tackling that QoS issue when it comes to VoLTE?
Well, people are still continuing voice at roughly the same level as before. So the total number of minutes on the network is staying constant. It's just that you're using a lot more of the other things. But one of the critical things that is holding it back is to make sure that QoS that it's at least as good as what you're getting today with circuit switched voice. And with the subsequent releases of LTE, more and more QoS capabilities are coming in. And so to a certain extent, that's why we're waiting for release 10, where this begins. And ultimately, they're trying to throw as many resources and as much spectrum at the issue as they can, and then hope that that this will do the trick.
Yeah.
What nobody wants to do is degrade the service, even more.
Yeah, that's a good point. I don't know if Payam, if you have any insight there on the QoS side of things. Obviously, from a vendor perspective, I know you guys are working hard on getting that up to speed. I guess, are you seeing the ability to handle QoS? Is that moving at a rate that you think will allow carriers to perhaps meet some deadlines for rolling out VoLTE services?
Is it moving fast enough? I don't believe so, because by the time standards get approved and get rolled in, I think you end up, spending about 24 months at best.
Yeah.
But again, being able to fall back to a cellular model in an interim basis when you detect that voice quality is below par. One of the capabilities that we are doing with partnership with some radio vendors and some analytic companies is real-time monitoring of radio and for specific for voice, and then maybe getting some feedback from the infrastructure that is carrying the voice, and at the control plane make decisions on what to do with calls made in that particular sector or calls made in that area, and maybe even potentially do what we call cell blocking, where if we anticipate calls in a specific area to be below a threshold, we deny origination or termination, and we push the handset into a 3G mode. So there are ways we are looking at to solve the problem in absence of standard, maybe with some unique methods.
Gotcha. Okay. And then I don't know if Miguel, if you have any insight maybe on the QoS side. I know some questions came in geared towards you as well, asking about the QoS side of things. Maybe sure. I guess your view on how that's progressing from your point of view.
My view on QoS, especially on the voice over LTE, also the one that goes into the legacy systems, it's all about implementation. You do have standards written. You do have viewpoints that are written down, how to deal with that. However, the implementation of that across different equipment providers and existing legacy equipment providers and the translation between the different protocols is all about implementation and testing. Yeah. So it's yes, in theory there's items that handle that, but in practice you always need to implement and test. So it's actually a classic systems integration problem of how do you in a heterogeneous multiple different companies into an existing network, and you also have a legacy. Well, how do you handle that across? How do you implement and test across all those different routes and use cases, and especially the edge use cases? It's not easy, and that's one of the reasons why I mentioned QoS. It's an implementation issue and a testing issue that needs to be thought through and needs to be vetted more than the standards issue. Although it's certainly it's always the theory versus the practice that gets I get you. Okay. That's my point of view, or what we're seeing right now is one or two operators doing quite a bit of testing.
Yeah. Well, it does seem like too. I mean, like you said, I mean, some of these are large carriers who are pushing pretty aggressively towards deployment. So you figure at some point that the QoS will be solved. I mean, obviously they're not going to launch service unless they're confident that's gonna work. So it does seem like there's lots of barriers in place. But with what's being pushed out there, you would think at some point that this stuff will have to be I guess managed and accomplished. So it's just a matter of getting to that point. So well, it looks like we got some other questions too, various ones asking about I guess hardware support or device support for VoLTE. Obviously that's an important part as well. I mean, VoLTE works for the most part once VoLTE is in a handset. I don't know if Roger, if you see how is the push towards VoLTE in devices coming along, and is there enough I guess chip support and band support out there to make VoLTE I guess a reality for the device market, and also I guess in the end for carriers and customers?
The device manufacturers are just waiting for the go signal and are ready to go. It's been really the networks that have held it behind, mm-hmm. And so I think over the next couple of months we will see VoLTE capable devices launching, mm-hmm. in anticipation of the networks being launched, and that way you have already a seeded universe that allows you to take advantage from day one.
Got it. I don't know, Payam, if you're seeing, I guess, support there also from the device community. Does it seem like that's like been much of an issue at this point?
No, I think the fact that VoLTE is launched in Korea, I think the handset manufacturers that serve that market have the capability. Yeah. We also know that the handsets are ready for launch for North America for a couple of the larger carriers. So I think the ecosystem is ready. I think it's really the challenges as was just mentioned associated with the rollout are overcome. Then I think you will see a ramp in deployment.
Got it. Okay. All right. Well, looks like let's see. We got some other questions here. Quite a few asking about, I guess, Verizon's plans for VoLTE. I know a lot of people are kind of waiting for Verizon, at least here domestically, to move forward with their VoLTE plans. As I mentioned, I know I talked to them last year, and they were still kind of waiting on some quality issues to come through. It sounds like this year there's some comments from the company making it sound like that they were getting closer and closer to eventually rolling out VoLTE here, perhaps next year. A lot of talk that they'll be one of the first ones to do it. I guess maybe from the panel's point of view, I mean, I guess what's your view on Verizon perhaps meeting its goal of rolling out VoLTE next year? Is that an aggressive move? Do you think that the pieces will be in place for that, or I guess what's the general view on that? So maybe I don't know, maybe from Miguel, if you have any thoughts on, I guess on Verizon's plans there. Is it a realistic point of view for them to have VoLTE commercially ready to go sometime next year?
Well, I really can't comment on what Verizon's plans are and what they're not, but I can comment on what's some of the things that carriers are going through. So, okay. For instance, it's to my earlier talk, it is a systems integration problem and a testing problem. So you need to get that solid, and something your discussions directly with Verizon, they mentioned some of those items that need to be tested. So that testing does go on and goes on for a while. That's why they're famous for the test man commercial.
Yep.
But the other piece, frankly, is also debating where do they launch, and where do they launch, and also where do they launch? So what's the business model? Where do they get the biggest bang for the buck? Do they launch and which handset manufacturers do they go with? But I think it's a whole, not just the technology issue as well, but it's also the coordination of and prioritization of the marketing and sales group as well, so and when to do that. Because of course they need to test and around when you leave the LTE footprint and you go to a UMTS network there or CDMA network, how do you ensure that the call goes well? So that testing between those two, LTE has some functionality that enables that. Mm-hmm. But frankly, that the edge cases are the most important test cases you need to do. And that will happen quite a bit. If you go from LTE coverage area or to a CDMA coverage area and going back and forth. And what do you do with those use cases? So certainly there's a lot of system integration and testing, but at the end of the day, it's on when do you launch that service, and do you do anything special with it, or do you kind of just launch it with minimal user impact? How do you launch it, and I think there's still some priorities that they may be going through within the company, but not knowing specifically the Verizon market. Sure. I can't speak to them, but I could speak to what the companies like them are going through. So that testing is the part. And frankly, the business guys, the marketing and sales, especially the marketing group, is also certainly involved and in the weeds around when and who to launch it with and how do you roll it out.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Makes sense. Yeah. Obviously, that's going to be a big challenge because I mean, if you've got these enhanced capabilities from VoLTE, you definitely want to make sure you're, at least from a marketing perspective, you're taking advantage of that. So it could be a good challenge for them too. I don't know, Roger.
If I can, Dan, if I can mention, if you look at the Verizon's the red map that they advertise on television compared to the blue, red, blue, and pink, green, and I don't know the other color. Mm-hmm. And if you look, I mean, it's definitely an impressive footprint, but a lot of that footprint, a chunk of that footprint is actually where they have made partnership with their rural associates, and Spectrum belongs to Verizon, but the build-out is done by these regional carriers. So I think a couple of things that also Verizon may have to contemplate, and is probably doing, has to do with the business model associated with the partnership they have with these regional carriers, because voice was supposed to be a roaming revenue, and now it's going to go over LTE. I think there's some commercial models that need to be resolved between the carriers there. And then the other side, from the technical side, they have to make sure that from a radio planning and also from a backhaul and from interconnect from these regional carriers back to the Verizon's network, the qualities of the level that a carrier like Verizon will stand by. So I think given those, the fact that I don't believe that those are currently fully resolved, I don't expect first half of next year being the right time for the launch. Yeah,
it's a good point. I know at that CCA show I was at last week or 2 weeks ago now, that was definitely a topic of conversation, is how this works across the rural carriers and how they're impacted by this. So that'll be something to see as well. I was going to say, Roger, I don't know if you have any insight or your views on the ability for Verizon, or I guess any carrier for that point, to launch VoLTE perhaps next year, or we're looking more at a 2015, 2016 timeframe.
Well, having VoLTE does not mean that you will not have a circuit switched voice.
Sure.
And if somebody roams into the rural partner markets, they will fall back into circuit switched voice, and the problem is solved that way, basically, as it is already today. Yeah. But it is for Verizon, a company that differentiates itself through network leadership, quite important to launch this first and use it as another proof case that it is leading in the United States. Mm-hmm. And we see, especially with AT&T, investing so heavily into their VIP program. They are now Verizon invests about $8 billion in wireless. For the next 3 years, AT&T is investing 13 billion in wireless every year. Clearly designed to catch up with AT&T, with Verizon. Mm-hmm. And so, Verizon needs another stick to beat them back. That when AT&T reaches network coverage, and we see how important it is to AT&T, with AT&T advertising left and right. We're not only the fastest on LTE, but we have most reliable. How hard they're trying to knock Verizon off that network leadership pedestal that they're on, and Verizon is trying everything they can to stay on it, because it is the key of their success. So to me, VoLTE is just another indication and battlefield in that war between those two companies.
Got it. Okay. All right. Makes sense. Well, again, I know we've had quite a few questions asking, I guess, kind of about this whole issue with circuit switch fallback and the importance of that. That does seem like that's one of those issues that is going to probably plague VoLTE for a while, at least until VoLTE is perhaps more uniform across carriers. I guess the challenge of that, it does seem like it's perhaps a technical issue that can be resolved. I know, Miguel, that you've kind of mentioned a lot about the testing part of this and the need to do that. Has testing for circuit switch fallback, has that been thorough enough? And do you think that can be, I guess, tackled efficiently in a relatively short time frame?
No, circuit switch fallback is actually launched in the UMTS markets in Europe today, and the switch-based model seems to be reasonable, but the feedback that I hear the carriers are offering, it's not really a pleasant experience for the user. In North America, I think I'm not as closely tied to the GSM carriers as I am to the CDMA carriers. I don't know where they are, but I know in the CDMA carrier you will see the launch by middle of next year for sure.
All
right. And Miguel, I don't know if you had any insight in that as well.
Yeah, no, I think nothing. Okay. Wait, outside of testing is an area that always gets squeezed, and and carriers who don't do enough of it pay the price at the end. Yeah. And that's why I think and testing does require to really think through it, all the use cases, especially the edge use cases well, and it's a tough ordeal. And having done a lot of testing at some of these carriers for many years, it's certainly an area that does require a lot of handsets. Some of the questions does require a lot of time and effort and focus to get it right. So.
Yeah, yeah. Well, obviously, again, there's a lot of issues still ahead, and with the big carriers behind this initiative, I mean, obviously, VoLTE will eventually come to market here, but as we've kind of seen through this discussion here and a lot of questions, there are a lot of concerns. It seems like still about, I guess, the technical aspects of this and how those will be tackled. So, again, this is one of those issues that I think will be getting bigger and bigger as we move forward as carriers start to roll out LTE or VoLTE services. This will be a big part of it. But again, it does seem like carriers are pushing pretty hard for this, at least those that can support it across their network. So, I guess we'll kind of see how that plays out. Well, again, we're just about out of time here. I do want to thank our panel members once again for partaking and providing the insight here. Thanks a lot, guys, for the information. And also to let those know who are listening in that for the questions that we did not get to, and there were quite a few there, sorry we didn't get to more of those, a lot of technical questions as well. We will be sharing those with our panel members for some potential follow-up offline, so look for perhaps some responses to those. And also let those know who are listening in that if you did register for this webinar, you will get a copy of the report sent to you, as well as a link to a replay of the webinar if you want to relive this again. Or you can also check it out on our website at rcrwireless.com to get some more information. But again, I want to thank everyone for joining us today, and a special thanks to Miguel, to Roger, and Payam for providing the insights. I would definitely appreciate that, guys. Thanks so much for that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan.
Great.
Thank you very much, Dan.
Great. Thanks a lot, everyone, again for taking the time, and have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.